You've felt it, haven't you? That slow, suffocating realization that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you're becoming invisible. Not physically, but socially. You walk into a room and people's eyes glide right past you like you're furniture. You speak, and there's that half-second delay before anyone acknowledges you said anything at all. You contribute to a conversation, and it's like dropping a stone into water. There's a brief ripple, and then nothing. And here's what makes it worse. You know you're smart enough, you know you're capable, you know you have value, but somehow, none of that translates into presence. Somehow you've become background noise in your own life. And the worst part? You can't figure out exactly when it happened. There was no single moment, no dramatic event. You just woke up one day and realized that people treat you like you're optional, like your presence doesn't add or subtract anything from the equation. You've become what the laws of power call a displaced person, someone who exists in social spaces but doesn't occupy them. And if you're being honest with yourself right now, if you're feeling that tightness in your chest because you know exactly what I'm talking about, then you need to understand something crucial. This isn't happening to you by accident. There's a specific law of power at work here, and once you understand it, once you see the mechanism that's making you disappear, you can reverse it completely. Let me take you into the mind of Robert Greene, one of the most important strategists of modern power dynamics. In his masterwork, The 48 Laws of Power, Greene doesn't just describe how power works. He reveals the brutal mechanics underneath human interaction. And one law in particular explains exactly why some people become magnetic presences that command attention the moment they enter a room, while others fade into complete irrelevance. Law 6 states, court attention at all costs. But here's what most people misunderstand about this law. It's not about being loud. It's not about being obnoxious. It's not about desperate displays for validation. It's about understanding a fundamental truth of human nature. Attention is the currency of social existence. Without it, you don't exist in any meaningful way. You might be physically present, but socially, you're a ghost. And here's the mechanism that determines who gets attention and who becomes invisible. Human beings are biologically wired to notice novelty, contrast, and perceived value. If you present yourself as generic, predictable, and indistinguishable from everyone else, the human brain categorizes you as irrelevant background data and filters you out automatically. This isn't personal, it's neurological. The brain conserves energy by ignoring stimuli that appear to offer no survival advantage, no status gain, no emotional payoff. So when you show up to social situations trying to blend in, trying not to make waves, trying to be agreeable and pleasant and inoffensive, what you're actually doing is triggering the brain's ignore mechanism in everyone around you. You're communicating in the language of irrelevance. Now let me show you what happens when you don't understand this law. You start developing what I call the fading pattern. It happens in stages, and each stage makes you more invisible than the last. Stage 1 is over-accommodation. You agree too quickly. You adjust your opinions to match the room. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You pretend to be interested in topics that bore you to death. You do this because you think it makes you likable, easy to be around. But what it actually does is erase your edges, and edges are what the human eye notices. Smooth, round, agreeable things blend into the background. Stage 2 is self-diminishment. You start prefacing your ideas with sorry, just my opinion, or I might be wrong, or this probably doesn't matter. You do this to protect yourself from potential criticism. But what you're really doing is teaching people that your thoughts aren't worth considering seriously. You're providing the dismissal before they even have to. Stage 3 is reactive existence. You stop initiating. You stop proposing. You stop leading. You wait to see what everyone else wants to do, and then you go along with it. You become a passenger in every social situation, never a driver. And passengers are forgettable. Drivers are memorable. Stage 4 is the disappearance itself. People stop inviting you to things, not because they dislike you, but because they literally forget you exist. You've trained them so thoroughly to overlook you that you no longer register as a social entity in their consciousness. You've successfully made yourself invisible. Before I show you how to reverse this, I need you to do something for me, and I want you to be completely honest. How many times have you felt like you were screaming into a void? Like you had something important to say but nobody was listening? Like you were watching everyone else live these full, vibrant social lives while you sat on the sidelines wondering what was wrong with you? If that's you, if you know that feeling in your bones, I want you to leave a comment right now and just write, "I feel invisible." That's it, just those 3 words. Because here's what happens when you do that. First, you acknowledge to yourself that this is real, that you're not imagining it, that this struggle is valid. Second, you'll see dozens, maybe hundreds of other people writing the same exact thing, and suddenly you'll realize this isn't a personal defect. It's a pattern that affects countless people who were never taught the laws of power. You'll see that you're not broken, you're just uninformed. And third, your comment will give someone else the courage to admit what they're going through. Someone will read your words and think, "Thank God it's not just me." So go ahead, write it down. There, I feel invisible. And let's start breaking this pattern together. Because once you understand why you've been fading, we can start making you undeniably visible again. So here's the solution, and it's going to require you to do something that feels completely backwards at first. You need to stop trying to fit in and start deliberately creating contrast. Listen carefully, because this is the core mechanism. The human brain notices difference. It notices disruption. It notices the unexpected. If you want to become visible, you need to become difficult to ignore. And that means embracing the exact opposite of everything you've been doing. Where you've been agreeable, you need to become opinionated. Where you've been accommodating, you need to become selective. Where you've been predictable, you need to become surprising. Where you've been available to everyone, you need to become scarce and valuable. This is the essence of Law 6. You don't court attention by begging for it. You court it by making yourself the most interesting element in any environment you enter. And here's how that translates into practical action. First, develop what I call signature positions. These are strong, clear opinions on topics that matter in your social or professional circles. Not safe, middle-of-the-road takes that everyone already agrees with. Actual positions that reveal how you think differently from the consensus. When someone brings up a topic you have a signature position on, you state it clearly, and you defend it with confidence. You don't apologize for thinking differently. You don't soften it with qualifiers. You present it as someone who has thought deeply about this and arrived at a conclusion. Even if people disagree, they remember you. Especially if they disagree. They remember you because you've created a mental mark, a point of contrast in their consciousness. Second, master the art of strategic mystery. This is where most invisible people fail catastrophically. They overshare, they overexplain, they provide too much information in a desperate attempt to be understood and accepted. But here's the power move. Hold back. Don't answer every question fully. Don't explain your entire reasoning. Don't lay out your whole schedule, your whole history, your whole thought process. Leave gaps. Leave space for curiosity. Let people wonder about you. When someone asks what you did this weekend and you had an incredible experience, you don't give them the full itinerary. You say something like, "I went somewhere unexpected," and you smile and move on. Now you've created intrigue. Now they're thinking about you after the conversation ends, trying to figure you out. Third, practice selective unavailability. This is directly from the laws of power, and it's brutally effective. If you're always available, always responding immediately, always making time for anyone who asks, you're communicating that your time has no value. And if your time has no value, you have no value. So you start saying no. Not to everything, but strategically. Someone invites you to something last minute? Sometimes you're already committed to something else, even if that something else is reading a book alone. Someone texts you. You respond when you have time, not the second you see it. You train people that access to you is something that requires effort. And human psychology is simple here. We value what requires effort to obtain, and we dismiss what's freely available. Fourth, and this is critical, you need to develop a visible skill or knowledge base that makes you irreplaceable in specific situations. Invisible people are generic people. Visible people are specialists. You need to become the person who knows about wine, or who understands cryptocurrency, or who can fix technical problems, or who knows the best restaurants, or who understands psychology, or who can read people's body language, something that makes you uniquely valuable. And then when your knowledge becomes relevant, you don't perform like a trained SEAL desperate for approval. You share it casually, like someone who knows their worth. You become the person people call when they need that specific thing, and suddenly you're not optional anymore, you're necessary. Let me give you a real example of how this works in practice. There's a guy I'll call Marcus who came to me completely invisible in his corporate job. He'd been there 5 years, worked hard, never caused problems, and was passed over for promotion 3 times. In meetings, people literally talked over him. His boss forgot to invite him to important strategy sessions. He was the definition of disappeared. So I had him implement these principles systematically. First, we identified his signature position. He'd been quietly observing that the company's customer retention strategy was fundamentally flawed, but he'd never said anything because he didn't want to seem critical. I told him to prepare a clear, bold counterproposal and present it at the next meeting, not as a suggestion but as a fully formed alternative strategy. Second, he stopped being available for every little request. When people asked him to take on additional work, he started evaluating whether it advanced his goals or just made him the office workhorse, and he started declining the workhorse tasks. Third, he developed visible expertise in data analytics that nobody else in his department understood deeply, and he made sure people knew he had this knowledge by casually mentioning insights in meetings. Within 4 months, everything changed. His retention strategy was adopted by leadership. His calendar filled up with meeting requests because people wanted his analytical perspective. He got pulled into executive discussions, and 6 months later he was promoted 2 levels up, skipping the position he'd originally been passed over for. What changed? His competence was always there, but now he had presence. He'd gone from background noise to signal. Now let's go deeper into the dark psychology behind why this works. There's a principle in human cognition called the scarcity effect, and it states that humans place higher value on things that are rare or difficult to obtain. When you make yourself scarce, when you create mystery, when you're selective about where you invest your time and attention, you trigger this scarcity effect in other people's perception of you. They start wondering why you're not as available as everyone else, and the only explanation their brain generates is that you must have something more valuable going on. You must be in higher demand. You must be worth more. And once that perception sets in, it becomes self-reinforcing. People treat you as valuable, which makes others perceive you as valuable, which makes people compete for your time, which makes you genuinely valuable. This is the upward spiral of presence. The opposite is equally true. When you're always available, always eager, always accommodating, you trigger the abundance effect. Your time appears to have no competing demands, which means it appears to have no value, which means you appear to have no value. This is the downward spiral of invisibility. And here's the mechanism that most people never grasp. This isn't about manipulating people in a malicious sense. It's about understanding how human value perception works and aligning your behavior with reality. You actually are valuable. You actually do have knowledge and skills and perspectives worth paying attention to. But if you don't present yourself in a way that allows other people's brains to recognize that value, it doesn't matter. Potential that nobody notices is identical in outcome to potential that doesn't exist. There's another layer here that touches on the work of Machiavelli, particularly in The Prince. Machiavelli observed that leaders who tried too hard to be loved often ended up despised, while leaders who were willing to be feared, respected, even occasionally resented, maintained power far more effectively. The application to personal presence is direct. When you're trying to make everyone like you, when you're bending yourself into whatever shape you think will gain approval, you actually make yourself unlikable because you appear weak and desperate. But when you're willing to stand firm in your positions, to say no, to be misunderstood or temporarily disliked, you generate respect. And respect is the foundation of presence. People might not always agree with you, but they can't ignore you. You've made yourself real in their perception. You exist as a force they have to account for, not as wallpaper they can ignore. Here's where the internal work becomes critical, because everything I've described so far is external behavior, but none of it will work if you don't fix what's happening inside your head. Most invisible people are invisible because they've internalized a belief that they don't deserve attention, that their thoughts aren't important enough, that other people are more interesting or more valuable or more worthy of being heard. This is a lie you've been telling yourself, probably for years, possibly since childhood. Maybe you were taught to be quiet, to not take up space, to defer to others. Maybe you were criticized when you spoke up, so you learned to shut down. Maybe you compared yourself to more charismatic people and decided you just weren't built that way. Whatever the source, you need to understand that this belief is killing your presence. So here's the internal shift you need to make. You need to decide that your perspective has inherent value simply because it's yours, because it comes from your unique combination of experiences, knowledge, and perception that literally nobody else has. You don't need to justify your right to be heard. You don't need to prove your worth before speaking. You exist, therefore your voice matters. This isn't arrogance, it's self-respect. This is the foundation that everything else builds on. And once you internalize this, once you genuinely believe that you have the same right to presence as anyone else in the room, your entire energy shifts. You stop seeking permission to exist. You stop telegraphing apology with your body language. You stop hedging every statement. You start occupying space naturally, speaking clearly, making eye contact, moving through the world like someone who expects to be noticed because you're worth noticing. Now let's talk about the 7-day challenge that's going to start rewiring your presence immediately. Day 1. Identify one signature position on a topic you care about and write it out clearly in 2 or 3 sentences that you could state in any conversation. Day 2. Practice saying no to one request for your time or attention, even if it's uncomfortable. Day 3. In any group conversation, make one strong statement without qualifiers like I think or maybe or sort of. State it as fact. Day 4. When someone asks you a personal question, give a brief answer and then ask them a question instead, practicing strategic mystery. Day 5. Make yourself unavailable to respond to messages for at least 3 hours, training yourself and others that you're not always accessible. Day 6. Share one piece of your specialized knowledge in a conversation without apologizing for knowing it or dumbing it down. Day 7. Evaluate where you spent your attention this week and cut out one time-wasting activity that makes you generically available to people who don't value you. Do this for 7 days and you'll notice something. Shift. People will start looking at you differently, listening more carefully, remembering what you said, because you're no longer communicating in the language of irrelevance. If you made it this far, you're already different from most people who feel invisible. Most people accept it, rationalize it, tell themselves they're just introverted or they prefer being in the background. But you know that's not true. You don't prefer being invisible, you've just been conditioned into it, and you're ready to break out. Here's what I want you to understand. Every single principle I shared today, every technique, every insight, it works. Not because it's manipulative or fake, but because it aligns your external behavior with your actual internal value. You're not becoming someone else. You're finally becoming visible as who you actually are. And that's what this channel is about. Every single week, I break down the laws of power, the principles of social dynamics, the psychology of presence and influence, and I show you exactly how to apply them in real life. Not theory, not philosophy lectures. Practical strategies you can use today. This isn't about turning you into a cold, calculating machine. It's about teaching you to exist in the world without apologizing for taking up space. So, if you're done being invisible, if you're ready to become someone people notice, remember, and respect, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And if this resonated with you, if you finally feel like someone understands what you're dealing with, leave a like so more people who need this message can find it. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't need to beg for attention. You just need to understand the laws, and presence becomes inevitable. I'll see you in the next one.